When you want to connect with your ideal clients, potential clients on an emotional level, one of the most powerful ways that you can do that is through humor. In today's episode here on the Brand Gravity Show, we're going deep into the science and psychology of using humor in advertising. I'm your host, psychology-driven brand strategist, Kaye Putnam, and my guest today is going to talk about how humor is commonly perceived and how it can be accurately and scientifically assessed as a brand. We get into key points about how to use it strategically, not just to get some cheap laughs. Paddy Gilmore is the founder of the Studio Gilmore, the Humor Consultancy. He helps brands become more profitable by advising them on how, when, and where to use humor in their products and communications. He brings 23 years of experience in advertising, master's degree in investigating humor, and has worked with numerous brands including Barclays, 3, Epson, and Getty Images. Let's dive into the conversation. Paddy, thank you so much for being on the show. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got interested in humor as it applies to brands?
Sure, yeah. So I did my master's about 25 years ago, quite a while back, and I was looking at humor techniques used by avant-garde artists. So that was my master's thesis. And I loved it. It was fascinating. And I studied humor mechanisms and I studied humor styles and how it works. And then on the back of that, I got into advertising because I thought, well, obviously funny ads are great. And, I wanted to work in the media. And I suppose kind of like, as well as working as a creative and then a strategist, I kept that kind of academic interest in the field and in how people perceive humor. Because it's a very complicated subject in many ways. And I just, did that up until a few years ago, and I thought there could be a consultancy offering here. And I was right. Yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Do you have a favorite case study of a brand that has leveraged humor really well and what the results have been?
Sure. I mean, I think one that comes to mind immediately is Snickers. So back in 2010, they started their "Be Honest Yourself When You're Hungry" campaign. Within the first year, they got global sales increasing by 15.9%. That's just in 1 year. I think also things like in terms of their territories, they're in 58 territories, and in 56 of those territories, they increased their market share. And that was all within the first 12 months. So phenomenally, important campaign for them, and definitely had a massive effect on the bottom line.
Yeah, no kidding. So as a small business owner who is maybe selling services, maybe they're consulting with other businesses, what role does humor play in maybe, forgive me, but like quote unquote, more serious B2B types of businesses?
It's a good question. Once upon a time, people saw humor and they thought, well, humor's just used for things like selling sweets, selling candy, selling beer, soft drinks, that kind of thing. But then over the past 20 or 30 years, you have brands that sell high-value items and high-consideration items using humor. A great example is Volkswagen. You don't buy a car on a whim. You think about it deeply before you choose your car. Geico in America, in terms of insurance. Insurance is an important thing. You want to, make sure it's reliable and so forth. The argument that B2B kind of brands cannot use humor doesn't really apply now. I think what we're seeing is that humor fundamentally creates deep brand warmth. That goes on for many, many years. And humor, really kind of draws that out. So that's why it's so effective.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of MailChimp too. MailChimp has this amazing little monkey character. It's a software email marketing. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Okay. So I'm asking this question as somebody who considers themselves to be deeply unfunny. How does an entrepreneur who's interested in applying humor to their brands get started? What are some of the first steps?
I think the first step, this is what I always do, is I look at the proposition. What exactly are they bringing to the market? Now, if that proposition, often if it's very controversial or very difficult to bring to market, then humor is a really good way of bringing it to market. Because essentially what it does is it makes people enjoy the feeling rather than having to rationalize the actual product or the brand itself. So the first thing I would do is look at the proposition, drill down into that, and then kind of on the back of that, just explore lots of different adverts, lots of different humorous adverts, and take it from there. I mean, what I typically do is I use humour science and psychology to work with brands and kind of break down exactly where they want to be and where they want to play. So that is a lot more intricate. But I think as two first steps, looking at the proposition and looking at humorous ads, so far is a really good way to begin.
Can you dive in a little bit to the science of humor and the psychology of it? What are some of the criteria or the aspects that you're looking at? Yeah, I would love to dive into the weeds a little bit there.
There's basically, over the past few years, we've kind of, ironed out three core human mechanisms. They've got very long names, but they're very, very interesting, very funny. So, but basically, each one of these mechanisms look at a specific area. One is cognitive, so that's looking at someone on an intellectual level. One is affective or emotional, and one is social. And once upon a time, we thought that these mechanisms were fighting it out between each other. And so, you'd get books on humour and said, well, the most important one is the cognitive one, because this is shown in many, many things. But now we're realizing that these mechanisms work together, a bit like pieces in a clock, like cogs in a clock. And so it's how they work together that causes the overall effect. And this is what brands can work with. So let's suppose a brand is looking to get a result that is both intellectual and emotional, cognitive and emotional. There's a certain way in which they can do that by bringing the two together. So it's a very exciting time.
Right. Amazing. Where or how do brands decide where to apply humor?
I think a lot depends on where the brand is in its kind of life stage. If it's just starting out, as a startup, there's certain types of humor that startups will typically use. Often they'll get a lot of resonance, a lot of shock value. And it's basically saying, look, we're here, we're in the market, this is what we offer. So that would be for a startup or a challenger brand. If, however, it's a brand like, say, McDonald's or Volkswagen or IKEA, well-known, kind of respectable brands, they would be in a very different place. So a lot depends on where the brand is. A lot depends on where the audience is. And as I said earlier, a lot depends on the proposition, exactly what it is they are selling.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of either common mistakes or missteps that brands have made when applying humor?
I think one of the commonest ones, one of the most frequent ones, is when they try to basically get the laugh without it having any thematic relationship with the brand or product. You sometimes see this in kind of local small town brands on bad radio stations. You hear about it on bad radio stations, and you think there's no real relation there. There's nothing there. That's a cardinal sin. I think another sin, another fault, which I've noticed a lot of brands doing recently, is they try and go for wacky and think it's funny. They'll do something very, very strange because they think, hey, this is good because this is going to go viral, And the thing is that what they're doing is they're creating something that's quirky, sure, but they're not really using the knowledge that we have of humor and how humor works to their best advantage.
Yeah, I could see that. And it's almost like you're belittling your audience in a way if you're not making the humor related to the brand or like cohesive with the rest of the story. You're almost just, it feels like a cheap trick.
Exactly. And the thing is as well, and I think this is often forgotten within advertising, is that we are basically taking up half a minute, possibly more, of someone's time. And time is people's most valuable asset, And so if we're going to do that, then, we need to firstly respect that. And secondly, do something that they're probably going to entertain them a bit. It's going to make them feel better about themselves, their lives, what's going on, what have you. So I very much believe, this is what I say to clients a lot, I say, look, imagine if we're in the entertainment business, the entertainment industry, because that's what the really great brands do. And the thing is, if you go into many advertising agencies, if you say the word entertainment, then people get very sniffy about it because they think, oh, no, we're in the business of selling. We're in the business of, transforming our brands into phenomenal world-beating powers. But fundamentally, when someone sits down in front of the TV, they're not sitting down to watch your ad. They're sitting down to watch Succession or to watch whatever it might be, Schitt's Creek, Mad Men, whatever. So when the ad comes in, on screen, it's got to be as, entertaining as possible.
Yes. I would love to hear another example or a story. Do you have a favorite client campaign that you've helped devise?
I worked on Tree, which is a big mobile network in the UK here. And they did a big campaign in 2014 called Singing Kitty. Just to give you a bit of background, in 2013, they had a massive award-winning ad campaign called Pony, which featured a Shetland pony doing the moonwalk. So, okay, that was great. The proposition was, we all love silly, we all share silly. So they had to follow that up. And it was tricky because it's like the second album syndrome. You've got to follow up a hit with a hit. So what we did is we had a singing cat, hence Singing Kitty. And this cat could be basically download something onto your phone, so you have an app, and you could voice sync it with your own voice, your own face, so you could be singing the same song. It was very, very popular. I think it got something like 5 million downloads within the first month. It was huge, and it was great to work on. I mean, it was about selling silly,
Take me behind the scenes. What did the conversations look like to arrive at that idea? What was the strategy behind the campaign?
It was basically looking at the key motivations for people on social. Three had discovered that, a lot of people using that network were young. They were typically on the big social networks. And they were thinking, okay, what are they sharing? Are they sharing pictures of themselves or memes? What kind of stuff is going viral? And they realized a lot of it was just very silly. So they thought, okay, we're not going to fight against this. We're going to use this. And by doing that, they differentiated themselves from the other big, mobile networks within the UK, who were seen and probably still are seen as being quite formal and stuffy. And so Three were saying, no, we're going to be a lot more fun. We're going to talk about silly as if it's serious. And we're going to talk about, the Three can share it.
Yes. We touched on this a little bit, but let's dive in a little bit deeper. Is there ever a danger for brands that decide to use humor, that it's going to overshadow like the main message or their values or other parts of their brand identity?
Yeah, that's called there's a great example of that. There was an ad campaign in the 1970s for Cinzano, and it was very, very funny. It was very, very popular. But on the back of it, sales of Martini, which is Cinzano's big competitor, went up because people just didn't remember the brand. They remembered the ads. The key, there's a number of different things you can do to stop that from happening. A key one, as I mentioned earlier, is making it thematically related. So really include the product in all the humor. Another thing which is really important to do is get those distinctive brand assets up and running early on in the ad. Have them in different places. I was recently doing a workshop on this, and we looked at a DHL ad, and we looked at how many times DHL used their brand assets, the red and the yellow, in the course of one short ad. And it was extraordinary. And it's a great ad. And it doesn't feel like overload. So for any brand, I think those are the two key things. Get the distinctive brand assets in and make it strongly related to the actual product and brand.
Yeah, that's great advice. Humor is subjective, is it not? So how do we, especially when we have a kind of at least wide audience of people, how do we decide what's going to be funny to our people?
Well, it's funny. It is subjective. But also what humor does is it makes a community. I think it was Sid Caesar, the famous American stand-up comedian, once said something. He said, humor makes people feel less alone. And that's very true. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. That's one of his most incredible qualities. I think when people say that humor is subjective, if you take a great sitcom or a great, film, when Harry Met Sally, most people will agree that's one of the greatest rom-coms ever made. Or Frasier, or Cheers, they're wonderful, wonderful sitcoms. So those are really subjective. You might not like them, but most people would agree they're pretty good. So what I tend to do is look at the kind of the wider audience, that a brand is speaking to. And I think allied to this is the fact that for most brands to grow in pretty much every category, the key thing is that they appeal to as wide an audience as possible. Because it's not about the loyalists. It's about also the like buyers as well. It's about getting fame and getting recognition across as wide a scale as possible. A great comedy does this. A great joke, if you like, does this. And so it's a similar kind of thing, whereby it's about the width and breadth of that audience, rather than pinpointing a small part of it.
Yeah, Brian Sharp talks about that in his How Brands Grow book. It's
exactly
about having that, big market salience. Okay, again, bringing it back to the practicality. You mentioned that entrepreneurs can look at examples of other ads, other campaigns that have been funny in the past. Where specifically can you find inspiration for ads? Or maybe there's other places where entrepreneurs can find humor inspiration as well that you could share.
Sure. I think, let's suppose, for example, a lot depends on where that brand wants to go. Okay. So if the brand is looking to use, basically kind of trigger people cognitively, so that's called comic wit. A great example of that are the Economist ads, the white-headed red ads. These were this campaign went on for something like 2 decades. And it was just print on a red background advertising the Economist magazine. And they were hugely successful. So in that sense, they would kind of look there. If they're looking for something which is a bit more emotional, McDonald's ads are extraordinary at this. McDonald's are very, very good in their advertising. And they have an ability to pick on various points in life where things are changing. Things like the first date, things like passing the driving test. Those kind of moments are things that McDonald's really looks at very, very closely, and they pull out the emotional power within those moments and make wonderful stories out of it. So a lot depends on where the brand wants to go, but those are 2 examples of the kind of ads that you can find online, everywhere, and they're really, really useful to look at.
Yeah, I love that so much. Do you see? Forgive the loaded question. So in this age, it feels like, especially in the US, and I don't know if it's the same over there as well, but consumers have a bigger voice than ever. There's this whole cancel culture situation that's happening with different brands. Is the role of humor going to shift and change in the future from your vantage point? Or is it something that brands can kind of safely employ in their strategy?
I think brands
take that where you want it.
Yeah. Brands can employ it safely. There are ways in which you can use humor safely. A lot depends on which of these 3 humor methods is used, because each of them has their specific dangers. And so what I do is, if a brand decides to go down like a social route, then I'll then say, okay, this is what we need to look at. This is what we need to be careful of. So there are definitely ways in which we can do that. I think one of the things about cancel culture is, it is important, and I can see why brands are fearful. But I often ask myself and ask the brands that I work with, to what extent is it a realistic event? To what extent is it simply a bit of kind of like fear that we have? I look at, any evidence they might have happening already. And then I also look at ways in which brands have successfully used humor, to avoid those things. So they have a series of case studies. And that means that brands, I often say in my work, with one hand, I kind of point the direction for the brand, and with the other hand, I literally hold their hand. I say, it's going to be okay. Don't worry. We're going to use humor, but don't worry, you're not going to lose sleep about this. So, yeah.
Amazing. Yes. You worked with Getty Images. Is that correct?
I did. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us about that campaign?
Yeah. So Getty, they were working on a quarterly campaign, and they were giving people an iconic print. so a print of Muhammad Ali or Marilyn Monroe, if they bought a certain amount of Getty Images per quarter. And so they hired me and they said, look, we've got this idea, we've got this campaign, but we just need to make it, really, give it traction. So I basically developed a postcard campaign for them. And on the postcard, I said something like, get an image that hasn't been tweeted, I don't know, put on Instagram, yada, yada, yada. It's called a print, And then I had a famous picture of Muhammad Ali. And it got the highest ever revenue for an end of quarter campaign for a Getty Images UK campaign. So that really was great. And that basically started things off. And on the back of that, I just did a lot of fun stuff with them. It was great. I even did like a call waiting thing whereby you call Getty Images for the office. And while you're waiting, you talk about time and the way that time is so important in photography. It might be 1/500th of a second, or it might be 15 seconds. So just playing around with what they were doing, and it was great because they felt, and I think rightly so, they felt they were a little bit formal, seen as being this kind of massive power within digital assets and photography, and they just wanted to be a bit more light-hearted about it. So yeah, really great to work with them.
I love the specificity of examples like that. Thank you so much for sharing. Well, first of all, before I ask the final question, where can people find more about you or learn more about humor in branding?
Well, my site is www.studiogilmore.com, and that's GILMORE. And I've got a Substack called Brands in Humor as well. And I better point out that's humor with a U, or two U's. Two U's. So that's my weekly Substack. So you can find out more about it there. In terms of finding out more about humor as a phenomenon in advertising, a great place to start is the copybook, which is it is published by TAP, and it came out a few years ago. The copybook basically contains some fantastic ads, very, very funny ads. It's really good. Obviously, it's great stuff online, and it's a wealth of resources out there.
Amazing. And my final question, if you could impart just like one kernel of knowledge that you want people to remember about anything, but probably about humor and branding, what would you want people to know?
I'd probably say there's probably one kernel of knowledge made up of three things. So this is something which is basically true. There was a big bit of research done about 10 years ago. They examined all the papers written on humor and advertising over a 4-decade stretch. And they did what's called meta-analysis, which meant they put all the results into a big machine. They found out exactly what they had discovered. And there were 3 conclusions. One is that humor makes people warmer towards the brand. Second is humor makes people warmer towards the campaign. And finally, it makes people more likely to buy the product or service. So greater brand warmth, greater campaign warmth, greater likelihood to buy. And I think that, and this is the final kernel here, I think that any brand that doesn't look at the potential of humor is going to be missing a trick in the years ahead.
Mic drop. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us today. I would love to continue this conversation. Like Paddy said, one of the ways that we can apply humor to our own brands is to seek out brands that have similar vibes or values or archetypes as us and see what they've done successfully in the past when it comes to humor. So just as a consumer, what has been your favorite funny advertisement or moment that you've had with a brand that instilled some sense of humor? I would love to hear either in the comments if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening on your favorite podcast episode. I would hugely appreciate if you took a moment to leave a 5-star review and share your thoughts there. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you, and I will see you in the next episode.